Bloodborne is a masterpiece of modern gaming, and here I discuss why Bloodborne could be the greatest horror game. Not generally seen as a horror game due to its heavy action RPG elements, it was only after thinking about this game and what it represents that I couldn't help but feel the game transcends that of only being an action RPG. The various elements of the game and why I consider it such an amazing title are detailed in my other video, but many of these same elements also come together to make Bloodborne such an incredible horror game, or at the very least, scary and able to sit alongside other titles that are staples in video game horror. Bloodborne is a masterclass of fusing these different genres together and creating a game that can appeal to many gamers, in addition to those who want a challenging experience. The way it unnerves the player with several of its design choices and themes make it an incredible game already. But the way From Software has created this harrowing experience is an example for many future horror games to follow. This is why Bloodborne is the greatest horror game in recent years. Horror games are nothing new, and many would consider the likes of Resident Evil or Silent Hill as standout franchises when discussing the genre. With their history dating back to the original PlayStation days, they are often synonymous whenever gamers discuss these sorts of games. But Bloodborne differs to other games in how it delivers its scares, or more specifically, how Bloodborne's lack of traditional scares separates it from other horror games. First and foremost, Bloodborne instills in the player a sense of fear, a fear of the unknown, to fear the old blood and to fear the game's apparent difficulty. This last point manifests itself in one of the earliest scenes in the game where players almost have no choice but to die. A foreshadowing of what is inevitable to any existing Demon Souls or Dark Souls fan. This instills fear into the player, both of an easy death and sets an example for players to let them know that the next enemy you see could be your demise. Bloodborne almost instills a sense of dread in the player throughout the entire playtime, for even when your character is leveled up, even the most basic of enemies could mean your death if you aren't concentrating. Venturing forward on the lookout for the next lamp, hoping not to die and losing your blood echoes. A brief relief for players before they start their journey into the next new territory and towards the next lamp. But the difficulty is just one reason as how From Software took an action RPG and made it into a survival horror classic. Bloodborne is one of the greatest looking video games in recent times, and apart from being technically impressive, it's the attention to detail which further emphasises the horrific nature of the game. We see coffins chained up around the world, reminding players that death is everywhere in Yharnam. The creatures that roam Bloodborne are grotesque, and even though it is the player which is on the hunt, these creatures and enemies want nothing more than to kill the player once they get you in their sights. The design of the creatures fits in perfectly with this gothic adventure, with buildings sometimes towering over the player, plus a tunnel system beneath you. The game creates a world where the dangers lurk all around you. With locked doors and gates, which often open into earlier sections of the game, players work their way through this tightly constructed, claustrophobic world, never quite knowing what lurks around the next corner. The world design comes to life when, with the design of the sounds and music, or lack of music, within the game, hearing creatures growl and moan, or cough and move around, or when the sound is used so minimally that it can almost make the player feel uncomfortable. But as we explore the world, we also hear the cry of babies and characters who have barred themselves up in their homes, another visual design element that reinforces the horrors that have taken hold by the old blood and foreshadowing more which lay ahead. whether those who haven't turned into beasts protect what they have left. But we also come across characters which have left their home and their loved ones, often succumbing to a terrible and tragic end. We see horror such as with Father Gascoigne, a loving father who succumbs to beasthood, leaving his 2 daughters behind, forcing his wife to look for him, but she would never return, unable to see what he once loved, the blood changing him until players make him meet his end. From the horrors inflicted on characters, we engage in combat designed to induce fear and anxiety. Even more so than a game like Dark Souls, the combat system of Bloodborne is all about attack and dodging attacks, or if wounded, countering quickly to regain the lost health in a risk-reward situation. But whilst other horror games can base much of their fear on jump scares, Bloodborne internalizes it within the player, whereby the player themselves heightens their own fear from simply playing the game. The difficulty of Bloodborne is well known, but if players get themselves into a state where they begin to panic during combat, or think the odds are too great, then death will surely follow. From Software gives gamers what they need to overcome what seems like incredible odds. But Bloodborne manifests its horror through the player once again, but this time outside of combat, keeping the player on edge by them anticipating something to happen. A creature jumping out from behind a door, a figure which may be hiding in the shadows, or what you think when seeing the fog, knowing a boss fight is about to happen. Bloodborne harkens back to classic horror, where the horror element and scares were delivered through the build-up of tension, and less with jump scares. Bloodborne masterfully employs all of these techniques and delivers a game, an action RPG within a horrific setting, filled with tension, unsettling imagery and tragic stories. Bloodborne is unnerving and more refined horror than what many associate with the genre in modern years. Bloodborne is classic horror, to fear the unknown whilst you play and try and piece together what the truth of this world is. Bloodborne is not only a gaming masterpiece, it is also the quintessential horror masterpiece of our time. The influences of H.P. Lovecraft are apparent throughout, and although he wasn't appreciated when he was alive, his legacy lives on in many works of fiction, such as Bloodborne.